When We Disagree is a show about arguments, how we have them, why we have them, and their impact on our relationships and ourselves. We don't remember experiences as a whole. We remember their peaks, their best or worst moments, and how they ended. This is called the peak end rule, and the peak end rule explains why a mostly pleasant vacation with a terrible ending feels worse than a difficult trip with a great finale. In disagreements, this means the most intense moment and the conclusion disproportionately shape how we remember the entire conflict. The peak end rule explains why some arguments devastate relationships while others strengthen them. A 2-hour discussion with one cruel comment and a bitter ending becomes that horrible fight. The same 2 hours with one moment of understanding and a warm conclusion becomes the time we really connected. The bulk of the conversation matters less than its emotional peak and final moments. We're not remembering discussions, we're remembering highlights and endings. In workplace conflicts, the peak end rule shapes reputation and builds or destroys relationships. A generally good meeting with one tense exchange and an awkward ending gets remembered as a disaster. A difficult negotiation with a breakthrough moment and positive conclusion becomes a success story. Performance reviews, presentations, and projects get judged by their worst moments and final impressions more than their overall quality. Families unconsciously use the peak end rule. Holiday gatherings get defined by their worst argument and how everyone parted. Vacations are remembered for their best moments and whether they ended well. And understanding the peak end rule can help us shape better memories and create better conflicts. In disagreements, let's manage the peaks. Avoid saying the one thing that will be remembered forever. More importantly, invest in endings. Even if you can't resolve everything, end with connection. That was hard, but I love you. We disagree, and I respect you. We'll figure this out together. Leonard Cohen, Roberta Flack, and many others sang these affecting lyrics. Let's not talk of love and chains or the things we can't untie. Your eyes are soft with sorrow. Hey, that's no way to say goodbye. Sometimes the most important part of any disagreement is how you end it. I'm Michael Lee, Professor of Communication and Director of the Civility Initiative at the College of Charleston. Our guest today on When We Disagree is Bill Amata. Bill is the founder, chairman, and chief connectivity officer at IW Group, which is a multicultural, multi-generational advertising and public relations agency who represents companies like Disney, McDonald's, and many more. Bill, tell us an argument story.
Absolutely. Thanks, Michael, for having me on your program. The story I wanted to tell you about happened a few years ago, and I was working for a big beer company, and the company actually sent me a note saying they wanted me to do Spanish language media training. And the team in my office said, well, does anybody in our office speak Spanish? And we all kind of laughed and said, well, the company made a mistake. They probably want their Spanish language agency to handle this. So we sent a note back to them saying, this is not something that we do. And then the executive vice president of this organization sent a note back saying, what is it about you're going to do Spanish language media training that you don't understand? We wrote it in English. And we wrote back to them saying, well, this is not in our wheelhouse. And then he wrote a note back saying, well, if you're not going to do this, we'll expect your agency's resignation on my desk at 8 o'clock on Monday. And we ended up writing a note back saying, I guess we're doing Spanish language media training. And this is, our agency predominantly has Asian Americans in it. We have no one that speaks Spanish. So anyways, we went ahead and pulled together a whole group of people that are friends of ours that speak Spanish fluently and are bilingual. We go to the meeting and we run into one of the large PR agency executives who says to me, Bill, why would you say yes to this? This is what we do. And the executive of this company walks in and says, you guys need to shut up. All the agencies that are not IW Group, you need to sit in the back of the room. But before that happened, we had a huge argument in the hallway. And this agency said, we're never going to forget you for doing this. This is wrong. Anyways, we went ahead and did the training. The training went absolutely perfectly. And we ended up having another argument in the hallway with this big agency leader. And he ended up leaving the agency. Fast forward about 5 to 10 years. I don't recall how many years. And we're pitching an airline company. And while we're introducing ourselves and everybody's introducing themselves from the client side, the executive that was making the decision was the person I had an argument with at that beer company.
Uh-huh.
And I never sweat in a presentation, but I sweat through the entire presentation. Um, and at the very end, the gentleman there said, Bill's going to need a ride to the airport. I think I'm going to take him to the airport. And so this executive from this big PR agency uh, that I had a fight with in the hallway of this big beer company um, drove and said, Bill, that was an amazing presentation, but I just want to tell you that you should probably never, ever burn bridges with people because you never know where that person that you argued with will end up. And I'm in charge of this account. We're going to hire you
Huh.
because you did an amazing job, but just remember, don't burn bridges.
Did you think that you had burned the bridges or the bridge in those hallway arguments?
Absolutely. I mean, it got very heated, and I was trying to explain to this person the client said, we need to do this training or we're going to have to resign. And he said, you should have said no. He probably would not have fired you. And I said, well, we didn't have a choice. And he said, you did have a choice, and you chose to do this. And because you chose to do this, you marginalized our agency, which has represented this company for years.
This is somewhat paradoxical in a way, if I'm hearing you correctly, which is you have this bridge burning, disastrous argument twice over in the hallway with this guy. And then years later, he ends up hiring you, but also tells you not to burn bridges. Do I have that correctly?
Yes, he just said, we should have had a better conversation about this. You should have picked up the phone perhaps and called me and let me know what was going on. Instead, I was surprised. And in hindsight, I think I agree. I should have picked up the phone and given him a call and say, the client that we both represent asked us to do a Spanish language media training. We know this is what you do, but this is a situation, but I didn't do that. And so he found out about it the day we were presenting, and all the agencies that represent this company have to sit in the back and watch us do this training. And just imagine a bunch of people from an agency that don't speak a word of Spanish doing this training and bringing in some people that are friends of ours who do. The training went well, but I think this beer company also wanted to make a statement that if
Mm.
you're an agency representing us and we need you to do something, you need to step up. And probably what happened was the company asked these agencies to do this training, and they may not have wanted to do it or wanted to charge a large amount of money to get it done. So
Would you characterize this conflict that you had in the hallway as typical of either the industry or in your career or in your firm?
it is not typical, actually. We don't normally have these types of arguments. When we have these discussions, normally we would just call or send an email or a note saying this is the situation. We want to let you know about it. We have a discussion about it and it's resolved. So this happened many years ago, but it still has an impact on me to this day.
Yeah, if you could kind of summarize why this is such a sticky memory for you, I'd love to hear it.
It's a sticky memory because I feel like fast forward, there were so many things we did wrong. We could have talked to the executive and asked the executive some more questions. We could have picked up the phone or sent a note to the executive who represents this company and has represented this company for years and had a conversation with that person. We could have also talked to the other agency that works with them on Spanish language media and try to find a solution. And we didn't do any of that. We just basically told the executive of this company that we're going to do this because we were worried that we would get fired. And so I think there are a lot of things we could have done, and hindsight is 2020, as they say. But this also kind of thinking back on this made me realize that we need to have more civil discourse and civil conversations. We need
Yeah.
to realize that everyone should have a stake in the discussion, um, and we didn't do that.
Yeah, you're thoughtful as you recollect and Monday morning quarterback this years ago conflict that you had in terms of the tone and tenor of the discussion, but also following up and making sure everybody had a voice involved. But you've also been involved more broadly, not just in this particular memory of this incident, but also on civility research in general in a report called the Civility Paradox. Could you talk a little bit about your involvement in that report, what motivated it, and what were your conclusions?
So what motivated Michael was, a group of millennials and Gen Z, younger millennials and Gen Z. We started this group called the National Millennial and Gen Z Community about 10 years ago. Some of them got together with me. We sat over dinner and we talked about the incivility in our country and around the world. And I was asking these young people, what's fueling this? Some of it's being fueled by online discussions and bullying. Some of it is manifesting itself in workplaces and in classrooms. Some of it is manifesting itself in communities. And these young people said to me, Bill, boomers and Gen Xers have created this mess, and you're not doing anything about it. And you expect us as Gen Zers and younger millennials to fix a problem that you helped create. And that really bummed me out that entire evening. And I said, it's true. We're setting a bad example as boomers and Gen Xers on how to resolve conflict in our country and around the world. And so that was the reason why I decided I'm going to put some dollars behind a research project that will focus on what we can do to bring civility back to our country.
And what was the scope of this report?
So I reached out to a number of people, and I will have to say that I was heavily influenced by um, rural communities, um, non-Hispanic white leaders that were in the middle of the country and in the South, who were telling me that they don't feel as if they have a voice. They said all the major research projects that are being done by PR agencies and corporations always focus on the East Coast or the West Coast, and occasionally Chicago. And they said, we really don't have a voice, and all this research we feel is heavily biased. Well, I believe all research is somewhat biased, but that
Right.
led me to a conversation with people in the middle of the country and with smaller agencies. And I said, we need to do a research project that focuses on more than 1,000 people in the country, but 2 or 3,000 people in every single community that exists in the United States and our jurisdiction. So we brought in a company called Prodige, which does a lot of online research. But because I felt it was important for us to do qualitative research, we pulled in another company called 2 Cents, and we hired a general manager who does research over at Vox Media. He's now at Uber Advertising to be the general manager in charge of the research.
And so, in
And so that's what we
sum,
did.
this report is a qualitative and quantitative assessment of 3,000 ish randomly selected people across the United States about their perceptions of growing incivility in the culture writ large. Do I have that right?
Yes, that's right. So it's the age range is from 18 to 75. The people from urban, suburban, rural, and remote communities, all different ethnicities and races, um, and it covered a wide swath of the country and all the jurisdictions that exist. And when we did this research, I wanted to make sure that people in the heartland of America had an opportunity to review the data before it was presented. So we brought in a professor from the University of Nebraska Lincoln, a professor from the University of Southern Mississippi. We also pulled in a professor from a U.S. territory, the U.S. territory of Guam. And then we invited Syracuse University on the East Coast to also review it. So a number of professors reviewed the data before uh, we actually presented it.
Let's split this discussion of the report up into problems and solutions. A high level question, probably a silly question, but just to get the ball rolling. What problems of incivility did your report focus on?
One of the things that popped up, and just after we started to release this data, Mike, Krakowski, who we hired from Orange Fiery in New York, was pitching this to a number of media organizations. The New York Times actually wrote an op-ed piece, well, an editorial piece that said, civility is a fantasy.
Yeah, I read that.
You know, we don't, you know, this is not something that we're ever going to be able to resolve in our country. But one of the things that came out of the research is that every single generation, boomers, Gen Xers, millennials, Gen Zers that were polled, all believe that they are civil, but they don't trust the rest of the country and others to be civil. So a large number of people feel like they're being civil and they're practicing civility, but they don't trust others to be civil. But another big um, aha moment from this research is that each generation said that this incivility, they see it almost weekly, in some cases daily, online or in their communities or in their places of work. And it is impacting their mental health. And the group that severely is impacted by this incivility are Gen Zers. The other thing that came out of it is that 57% of those polled said that they refrain from having conversations with people because they just don't want to deal with a fight. They don't want to be misinterpreted. They don't want to be misunderstood. And that has terrible ramifications for us. If people don't feel comfortable having a conversation at workplace, about an idea or a view that could be helpful to a company or organization, that's going to stop us from fueling creativity and innovation. If people can't feel comfortable having conversations in their communities or in their families, this sets a dangerous precedence for what might happen in the future.
Yeah, you've really wandered into one of my consistent talking points on this show, which is that we often think about civility and incivility as having a negativity bias, which is that when we think about acts of incivility, our minds go to worst case scenarios, which is that somebody pulls the pin on the grenade and there's a heated antagonism that can spill over perhaps into the destruction of a relationship, but also violence, of course. But incivility also, to my mind, can be silence. Incivility can
Yeah,
be the silent treatment. Incivility can be conversational avoidance. And incivility can be giving up on one another to the point that we just don't even want to speak, especially about difficult subjects. And that can be impactful in interpersonal relationships, of course, in marriages, in cultures, in wider communities, and of course, the workplace.
yeah, sadly, Michael, when we were talking to some of the students, you know, some of the white students, particularly the white male students, came up to me and said, "Bill, we really believe in having these conversations around critical issues like inclusion and diversity. And every time we try to weigh in on those conversations around inclusion and diversity, we get shunned. And we're told, you need to shut up. You need to feel uncomfortable. What do you know about diversity and inclusion? You're a white person." So,
Hmm.
and so it's just so much easier just saying nothing rather than kind of weigh in on a conversation and say, you know, I have an idea or I have a suggestion or a solution, or I'd like to learn more. And we don't want that to happen. We want people to be curious about what's happening. We want people to say, hey, I want to learn more. I want to understand where you're coming from. I may not always agree with you, but I'd love to kind of understand your viewpoints, your thoughts, what's influencing or impacting your life. And that's the danger of this level of incivility that we have in our country.
We're talking about these moments when people are so fearful that they're going to say too much or hear too much that they end up saying nothing. And so incivility has these two sides. One is antagonism, aggression, and one is silence and withdrawal and avoidance. Let's transition and talk about solutions, or at least recommendations. What kinds of recommendations, solutions, ideas forward out of this two-sided problem did you come up with?
Well, first and foremost, I believe very strongly after spending a lot of time with Gen Zers and younger millennials that we need to pull them into conversations early. We need to bring them to the table. We need to ask them to help us find solutions together. We're in a multi-generational society now where 5 generations might be living at home. four and sometimes five generations are working in the workplace, and they're involved in community organizations. But I think boomers and Gen Xers and older millennials sometimes say, hey, they need to wait their turn. Um, I disagree with that. I think part of the solution requires us to pull younger people into these conversations early. We shouldn't hide problems from them. We should invite them in and have conversations. I also think we have to emulate good behavior, and executives in agencies and corporations and foundations and governmental agencies need to set expectations on civil discourse and emulate that behavior in all the things that we do. And the young people are saying that. Show us what good behavior looks like. Set some parameters. If you're talking about inclusiveness, make sure that people feel not only included, but seen and heard. And a lot of people are saying, we just want to be able to express our point of view without fear of retribution, without fear of being misjudged. Um, but there are also some things that came out from the research. Media people, they need to tell the truth and not always offer their opinions. Just report the news, report all sides. People are smart enough to decide what is something that they should take in and what's something they should discount. And people should also spend a little bit more time showing empathy, listening to people, engaging people, being curious, and allowing people to be seen and heard.
Well, the devil can sometimes be in the details, as you well know, and I direct an organization called the Civility Initiative and do lots of presentations on this. And I have found in some of my wider talks that the word civility, as you just referenced in the New York Times piece, civility itself can be a subject of controversy. And there are at least 3 or 4 different definitions of civility and what that means. And so when you talk about setting expectations, then that gets us to the what do we mean by civility, and then that gets us into how do we know it when we see it. And so I'm going to isolate a few of these at a high level, possible definitions, and try to figure out which one was motivating y'all's ideas. So one, many people think about civility as politeness, a kind of sense of decorum between you and I about what is sayable and what's not sayable. Second, perhaps it's rational, setting a terms for rational discussion where everybody gets a voice, and then we set about figuring out who has the force of the better argument, the best evidence. And then third, the one that I favor most strongly is from a book called Mere Civility, where an Oxford theorist named Teresa Bejan talks about mere civility as not pulling your punches, but not trying to land them all at the same time either. Which of those strikes you as more of a motivating factor as you conceptualize civility?
I kind of like the last one, and I think it falls in line with an author that I've been following, Adam Grant,
Yeah.
um, who says, "Hey, you shouldn't, be afraid to express your point of view. Shoot a few punches here and there, take a few punches here and there. But at the end, what you want to have is people kind of celebrating these kind of discussions. You can have a heated argument over dinner or lunch or in your family or in your places of work, but take a moment to kind of like listen to what is being said, um, work to find a way to understand it, and then have an open mind that your point of view or your beliefs or your research could be wrong. And if it is wrong, admit it's wrong and celebrate that you just learned something fresh and new. So I'd say a little bit of that. But I also think from the research, there's some comments that some people are saying, well, we could have a civil conversation, but I don't have to respect you. And I believe that we should respect the process. We should respect the person that is, offering their point of view. We don't have to agree with them, but we should at least provide a place where respectful conversations can happen. Um, and that's kind of my point of view on that.
Yeah. You have spent a career studying and shaping market and industry trends. And we have heard a lot, both in the wider political culture, in our relationships, and of course in the workplace, about how big a market there is for incivility. We consume this stuff. Even as we hate it, many of us consume it. But with reports like yours and several others, these authors we're mentioning are just a few examples. It also seems to me that there is a growing market for civility, a growing market for curious, compassionate connection, a growing market for healthy debate. So put your industry forecast hat on. Where do you see this market going? Where do you see services, workshops, trainings, products to meet that demand going over the next several years?
Well, one thing that I loved about the research is that 42% of those who responded said they have hope.
Yeah.
They're very hopeful that we're going to find a place where civility is returned, to our homes and to our workplaces, online, and even in our governmental institutions. But one thing that came out from the research didn't matter if you were conservative or if you were, progressive or anything in between. People believe that the place that needs to start is in their homes and with their families and extended families. So I do think that there's an opportunity here to teach and emulate good behavior in homes, in communities, and it has to start at a younger age. So I do think that there's an opportunity to, create workshops and books and work materials that'll be available in schools and in libraries and in talks with teachers on the best way to infuse this level of empathy and curiosity that we need to have. People should feel curious about the things that they don't know. And when they discover something or learn something or hear something, even if it's in a debate or argument, that they get to a point where they say, wow, that was amazing. I want to know more. I want to celebrate those things. So I think it has to start at home, and it also has to start in our communities.
Ilamata, thank you so much for being on When We Disagree.
Okay, it's a pleasure.
When We Disagree is recorded at the College of Charleston with creator and host Michael Lee. Recording and sound engineering by Jesse Kunz and Lance Laidlaw. Reach out to us at whenwedisagree@gmail.com.